A year ago today, I walked into an ER and they told me I would be dead in 2 days. And, you know, up until this point on this channel, I've always talked about my near fatal medical emergency, but I've never talked about what it was. And the main reason for that is there's a lot of shame behind it, I feel. And I've personally felt shame. But it's been a year now, and in part of my healing, I want to talk about it today, and I hope that someone out there watching this will hear this message and this story, and I hope it helps somebody. Um, I went into the hospital, and they told me that I was in liver failure. Now, as soon as you say liver, it was my liver. People pretty much know right away it's from alcohol abuse. And so that's why it's been hard for me to talk about that, because it's been hard for me myself to talk about the fact that I was, I guess, an alcoholic. Even now it's hard for me to say the word. But I'm going to tell you the story about how this happened. And, you know, there was a lot of shame and guilt. And, it was a hard journey. It's been a hard journey, but now I'm doing better. And my hope is that you get a message of hope and learn about gratitude and how gratitude can change your life and really heal your life if you focus on gratitude. So I have to say I was, I guess, an alcoholic. I was drinking too much. And clearly, I'm being lighthearted. That's not true at all. I was a drunk. I was a drunk every single day. And it might be weird hearing that, knowing this channel. This channel was born out of trying to focus on gratitude and help you all think about that. But yeah, my drinking really started getting worse around 2010. My father passed away. And then after that, we had about 6 family members die in a period of 5 years. And I had a really hard time dealing with that. But where things really got worse is during the COVID years. And that was hard for everybody. We were all isolated. We were all bored. I was isolated and bored, and the only thing I could think to do was drink. So I drank, and I drank a lot, and I drank more and more. And that isolation and the boredom with all the drinking, I started getting very depressed. It was very depressing for me. I couldn't see my friends, couldn't see my family, like none of us could. And it just got worse and worse. And I started drinking much, much more. And, it got to the point where I was drinking way more than you would imagine. If I'm really honest with myself, I would probably drink, I would drink as soon as I got up, and I would drink all day long. So I'd probably end up drinking. See, this is where the shame comes in. It's hard for me to say this. You know my channel. I'm full of gratitude. It's hard to imagine that I was like that. But I would drink about 18, 24, 26 shots of vodka a day. And that's not an exaggeration. That's a light day. And, luckily I have a sense of humor. Luckily I can look and back and laugh, and I'm generally a happy person. And I try to be joyful, so I can look back on the situation and find things to laugh about. And then it's not funny. I'm not, and here's the key, is like, I'm not at all belittling. Obviously, I nearly died from drinking. And so it's not something to be made light of at all. But, there are times that my mother used to always say you can laugh about it or you can cry about it, and I choose to laugh. So I do, there were times, I did some silly things, but, the COVID years were tough, and I was isolated, and I got really depressed. And it just continued, and I started getting kind of, honestly, sort of suicidal, and I didn't want to live anymore. I couldn't live like this anymore. And I was okay with the idea of dying. I was so depressed, and I was okay with the idea of dying. I wasn't going to try to kill myself um, actively, right away. But I did think I would rather be dead, and I couldn't live, and I thought I could just drink myself to death. And I thought I could just drink and get alcohol poisoning and just not wake up. And so, it was never like there was one time where I thought, okay, tonight's the night I'm going to drink myself to death. I just kept drinking and hoping I wouldn't wake up. And it's hard for me to say that, but it's true. So, um, my brother ended up moving out on Halloween of 2024. And when he moved out, I guess I sort of went on a bender. It was kind of like I was celebrating being alone in the house. So I drank a lot of Black Russians like I always did, watched a lot of Star Wars, had my Star Wars days. Um, and things were getting bad. And there were signs that things were getting bad long before. In July for my birthday, I stopped eating. I stopped being very active. I wasn't coming out to the forest, of course. My watch was telling me things that at night my breathing was off and my heart rate was up and I should see a doctor. But I was like, no, I'm not going to go see a doctor. Um, when my brother moved out and I was drinking so much, I started going through something, and I have to look at the definition because I can never remember what this word is. I'm going to read it to you because even looking at it, I can't remember it. Hepatic encephalopathy. It's basically when someone drinks so much, they kind of get it seems like Alzheimer's. Um, you drink so much, ammonia ends up getting in your brain and you can't remember things. And so it got to the point where I was not remembering anything. I would walk around the house and things would be somewhere and I wouldn't know why they were there because I couldn't remember that I had put them there. I was leaving notes to myself all over the house because I knew I would forget. But it got to the point where, it really was scary. I felt out of my mind, but you get to the point where you just don't care. I couldn't, it got to the point where I couldn't remember what I was trying to remember. I would think of something and I'd be like, okay, well, I need to remember this and let me write it down. And then I couldn't remember. I was like, forget it. Now I'm not even going to try to remember it because I know I won't. I know this isn't a very happy story. I'll get to the happy stuff, I promise. But it's hard to tell this story and also be happy. Because it does have a good ending, I promise. And one of the main things to remember for me is there was just so much shame involved, and that's one reason I never got help. Yeah, I had actually been in Al-Anon, which is for friends and family members of alcoholics. My mother was an alcoholic, and I started going to Al-Anon when I was 24. And as a part of that, I would go to open AA speaker meetings. So I've worked the steps. I know about the traditions. I've done all that, and I think part of that is one reason I never thought about getting help is because it sounds awful, but I'm just telling you where I was, the shame of it. I was like, I don't want to be one of those people. I'm an Al-Anon. I've spent all this time trying to learn about alcoholics and learning how to deal with them. How could I possibly be an alcoholic myself? So I think that was one of the things, and just I don't know. There's just so much shame, and so I wouldn't allow myself to admit it to myself, even after I got sick. Even right now, it's hard. Even right now, my close friends and close family know that it was my liver, but I just tell everybody else I had a major, near-death medical emergency. I haven't told people, but people know. I've been drunk for years, years. Lots of people knew that I was drinking all the time, so it's not really a surprise. Um, but on November 11th, 2024, I was supposed to have lunch with a buddy. That didn't work out. I went to take a nap, and when I woke up, I suddenly had a hernia in a place I didn't know you could have a hernia. And because of that, my buddy wasn't around, but I called a neighbor and I was like, I don't feel well. Could you take me to the ER? So she drove me to the ER, and on the way there, she's like, Brian, do you realize how jaundiced you are? I had no clue. See, I was out of it. My brain wasn't even functioning. And the lights in my house are kind of yellowish anyway, so I didn't notice. I wasn't looking at myself in the mirror. I didn't realize that my skin was yellow. I didn't realize that my eyes were black. And it was bad. I looked really, really bad. I looked like I was about to die. So when I got to the ER, I mean, they knew right away there was a problem, and uh, they said, "You can send your friend home. We need to admit you." And I was like, "Why?" They didn't actually tell me at first, and it wasn't until I got into the room where the doctor came in and told me that if I hadn't come in and they weren't helping me, I would have died in 2 days from a seizure. Um, and they asked me how much I drank, and I said, I don't know. I'd have a couple of glasses of wine at night. And I talked to my brother that day, and he's like, dude, you need to tell them how much you drink, because if they don't do something for you, you could have a seizure from withdrawals and you could die from that. I'm glad my brother told me to do that, although the doctor himself, he was like, listen, when we have someone admitted that looks like you and drinks as much as you do, we go ahead and give you the anti-seizure medicines so that you don't have a seizure and die. So I was in the hospital for 7 days, and it was 7 days of pure hell. I mean, because I had that brain thing, they were giving me something called lactulose, which helps flush you out. But they also had me on blood thinners, so they wouldn't let me go to. This sounds awful, but you need to know what I went through. Because sometimes people ask me, like, well, Brian, how did you get sober? And I was like, I nearly died, and I spent 7 days in the hospital pooping myself because they wouldn't let me go to the bathroom. I know that sounds crazy, but I was on blood thinners, so they said I was a fall risk. So like you have to wait for the nurses to come before you can go to the bathroom. Well, the nurses weren't coming, and when they give me this lactulose, which is makes me just have to go immediately, I either have to poop in the bed or I have to get to the bathroom and poop myself. I mean, it's awful, and I hate to admit it, but you have to know what it's like to understand the hell I was going through. It's a weird thing when you're that close to death, because when I was in the hospital, I was okay to die. I was in so much pain, and I just felt a sense of peace about it, even at that point. Um, it may have just been the drugs that they had me on. I mean, I was pretty drugged up. I remember taking pictures of myself in the hospital, and even after I looked at those pictures, I still couldn't see how bad off I looked. I've looked at those pictures since then. I mean, my skin is completely yellow, my eyes are black. I mean, it's very frightening and sad when I look at those pictures and see what I had become. Um, but I was okay to die in the hospital. I felt peace about that because they told me that I would, if I didn't have, at that point, if I didn't have a liver transplant within a couple of months, I'd be dead because my liver just wasn't functioning at all. And, I was okay with dying. And I want to mention this. It's funny. The only thing that kind of kept me going at the first couple of days, a couple of things. Yeah, I wasn't thinking much about other people, which I guess I should have. But at that point, you're just like, you don't care what's going on. And in a way, it almost felt like a vacation. That like I'm not worried about what I'm eating, what I'm cleaning, bills. I'm about dead, literally. And so, you know. But I did think a lot about my buddy's two kids. My buddy has two kids, and I did think a lot about how sad it would be if those kids grew up and they didn't get to know their Uncle Brian. They would only hear stories about their Uncle Brian. And I did think that would be very, very sad. So that kind of gave me a little bit of hope. They were the two people, ironically, that I thought about when I was there. They did come and see me in the hospital, and I was very thankful. They brought me little gifts and stuff. Um, Another thing that was amazing that happened, and I don't know what this is. Maybe it was because I was hallucinating from not having the alcohol. Maybe it was from all the drugs. Maybe it was a dream. But about the second or third day, another doctor comes in, and he looked like he could have been a doctor from General Hospital or something. I mean, he comes in, blonde hair, blue eyed. He comes and sits next to me, and he's like, "Listen, Brian, I know the doctors say that you need a liver transplant or else you'll be dead in a couple of months, 6 months max." He's like, "But I read your chart, I read the numbers, and I don't believe that that's true. And I don't think that you should either." and I want you to hold on to that belief. And I did. I held on to that belief. I don't know if it was a hallucination, a dream, or an angel, but I held on to that belief when he told me that. And a couple of days later, the other doctor kept coming in telling me I was going to die. And I told the nurses, I was like, I want to talk to the guy that came in a couple of days ago. He was more positive. I want to talk to him again. And they were like, we don't know who you're talking about. I was like, well, no, he just came here a couple of days ago and I described what he looked like. And like, Brian, there's never been anyone on the floor here that looks like what you're talking about. Like, we don't know who you're talking about. So I don't know what that was, but it gave me hope. Um, After 7 days of hell, my buddy came, picked me up at the hospital. I remember that day getting to see the sun for the first time, and getting to breathe fresh air was just incredible because it was something I'd taken for granted, and that's the whole reason I created this channel, and all of this stuff is all about learning how much I took for granted and having been given a second chance at life. And I really decided I was going to focus on gratitude. My brother and some other folks were like, Brian, aren't you more upset about dying? And I knew enough that if I went to bed every night crying in my sleep, I would end up dead in just a couple months. I knew my only choice was to keep a positive attitude and be grateful for every single day I wake up. And that's what I did. And I'm very thankful for that. My buddy's mother came and stayed with me the first week I was back at my house because, I couldn't even move. I was so weak. And it was good. I was glad she was there. And you just can't even imagine how much pain I was in. And I was so weak I couldn't walk 2 feet from the chair to the bed. I had to sleep on the couch. And my buddy's mom was there. And, if I happened to fall down, I couldn't even stand up. I couldn't get up on my own. And I remember my buddy's mom taught me how to stand up again. Here I am, this grown adult, and my buddy's mom is literally teaching me how to stand up for myself in my own kitchen because I couldn't even stand up. It was incredible. And I'm thankful that she was there for me. We ended up, I had to take responsibility for everything. At that point, we still thought that I would, if I didn't have a transplant, I would die. And so, they're trying to get me on the transplant list. I'm going through all the tests to get the transplant. I go and, my brother helps me go and we finalize my will so that everything's taken care of if I pass away. And, then it was if or when. And I planned my funerals. I wanted one in here in Charlotte because I have most of my friends and family. Well, most of my friends are here, but all my family's in Tennessee. So I figured we'd have like a little service in Johnson City, Tennessee, Keystone Church. It's where my grandfather was a pastor. And so I thought, well, we'll have a service here in Charlotte and we'll have a service in Johnson City. And I planned my funeral. And, I told everyone, I was like, you know what? If I die, I'm okay with that. And this wasn't depression. It was, I know I did this to myself. There's no blaming God. There's no blaming anyone else, not blaming the doctors. I know I'm the one who nearly killed myself from alcohol, and I'm okay with that. I accept my fate. I accept the consequences of my behavior and my actions, and I was prepared to die, and I was okay with that. In addition to gratitude, things that kept me going was, I was scared a lot. There's I have one day I had this idea of a roller coaster for some reason, and going to the doctors, getting the tests done, and everything. I thought, this is kind of like a roller coaster. I'm already on this ride. I can't get off. And sometimes they're, go up the hill and I'm scared to death, and sometimes I go down, but every so often there's a little place on the roller coaster where it's calm, and those are the, that was the time in between the visits and stuff, the doctor's visits. And I knew eventually, how at the end of the roller coaster, when it finally gets calm and everything's at peace, I knew one day I would get there. And it was either I'd be peaceful because I'd be healed, or it'd be peaceful because I would be dead. But either way, I knew peace was coming. And so I would hold on to that hope during those really hard times. There were times that the pain was so bad. I remember being in the kitchen and I was in so much pain I couldn't stand up and I couldn't sit down. I remember being in the kitchen and I just started crying. And I remember thinking to God, I was like, if you kept me alive so that I can be in this much pain for the rest of my life, then I'll go to the ABC store tonight and I'll just finish this job because I can't live like this. So, the point of that is it wasn't just like all peachy keen and happiness and oh, gratitude, yay, yay, yay. I mean, there were times I had a lot of doubt and I couldn't take the pain, and I was like, I'm gonna end this if this continues. Luckily, it didn't continue, um, and I slowly got healthier and healthier. And I'll tell you this story too. I'm not, I don't talk much on this channel about like religion and stuff, but I did grow up in a church and I do believe in God, and I'm a Christian, so I do believe in Jesus. This may sound corny or cheesy or I don't know what, but, I do believe in Jesus. And I remember at night, every night when I would go to bed, I would imagine Jesus right by my bed, and I would say to Jesus, I was like, I know that you've healed people before, and I know you can heal people again, so I don't need you to help me heal. And I would imagine Jesus healing my liver and making me whole again. And, I remember once, it was almost like during that visualization, it was almost like Jesus was like, you don't have to view me as being so far away, give me a hug. And I imagined getting up and giving Jesus a hug and feeling that healing energy, healing my liver. And so, I think it worked. Thank you, Jesus. Like I say, I'm not terribly religious, but it, I definitely relied on Jesus's help. And I do believe that I'm a miracle. I mean, it's a miracle that I'm doing so well. And I'm so grateful and I'm so thankful. As time progressed and I started getting stronger and healthier and focusing on gratitude, I I started walking a little bit more, and I was so thankful to finally be able to get outside. And I finally got to the point where I mean, it took a long time, but I finally got to the point where I could walk to the baseball fields. There's a little baseball field kind of on the side of this forest, and usually I walk. There's a bench there. The reason I walked there instead of directly through the forest at first was because I was so tired I had to sit at the bench. Eventually, I got strong enough and healthy enough that I could make it all the way here to this forest. And over there's the waterfall that I've made videos at. And, I was so thankful to be able to come to the forest. You have no idea. And so I made it a mission to come to the forest every single day and walk here and be thankful and spend time here. Just being grateful and thankful that I'm alive. And say, I practiced this several times so that I wouldn't get emotional. It didn't work. Um, um, and I felt like God gave me a second chance at life. He definitely did. And I'm so thankful. And I thought, how can I give back? I want to give back, but I don't know how to. Like, I don't want to become a minister. I mean, I have faith, but I don't want to start a church, and the whole AA thing, like, oh, am I going to become an AA speaker? the thing is, like, my path to sobriety was completely different from anyone that I personally have known, and it's not, I can't say to, someone asks me, how do you get sober? Nearly kill yourself from alcohol and, daily be in a hospital where you're pooping yourself all day long and they're just taking blood samples all night long, live through hell, and then you'll stop drinking. You can't say that. So that wasn't my path either. I haven't watched this back yet, but I can tell that it keeps moving me back and forth, and I apologize for that in advance. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know how to make my phone not do that. I don't know why it's changing. I think it's probably because of the sun. But anyway, sorry about that. I'll learn that one day. If anybody knows, you can leave a comment and tell me how to fix it on my phone while I'm recording. I didn't know how to give back. And one day I went to lunch with another buddy, and I had so many people, by the way, that were so helpful when I was sick, that would take me to the hospital appointments and doctor's appointments, get blood drawn, all that sort of stuff. And one of my buddies and his dad even came over and helped me clean the house. And one day after I was finally healthy, I'd lost 75 pounds through all this. I don't recommend that as your weight loss plan, but I lost 75 pounds pretty quickly. So I went to lunch one day with this buddy and his dad, and his father is very religious, strong faith. And we spent 2 hours at lunch that day talking about what had happened. He had been in a near fatal medical emergency as well, heart attack, heart issue. And we talked about what that's like and how you get such profound gratitude when you're in that kind of situation, because you know how close you are to death. And I was telling him, I was like, I don't know what to do. I want to give back, but I don't know how to. And we spent 2 hours talking, and I was like, I don't want to become a minister. I don't want to become some AA speaker. I don't know what to do. And he's like, Brian, it'll come to you when the time is right. It'll come to you. And we spent 2 hours talking. I cried, bawled my eyes out at lunch. It was a really awesome moment. And I was so thankful I got to talk to him like that. That was on a Friday. On Sunday, he had a stroke, and I think by Tuesday, he had passed away. And like a week later, I was at his funeral. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it, but it was so profound that we had that talk. And, I'm at the funeral and I'm looking at his casket and I'm thinking, that could be me. I was so close. And we were both just talking last week about this. And now he's there, and luckily I'm alive. And it made me think. He said it'll come to me, and I want to find some way to give back. A couple days later, I'm walking in the forest, and I had the thought to myself. I was like, I come to this forest every single day. Every single day I'm devoted. I don't know what just flew by. Every single day I'm devoted to coming to the forest. I'm devoted to focusing on gratitude. I personally watch a lot of videos on YouTube about positive thinking and motivation. Thought, why don't I just record, my journey here? Why don't I talk about gratitude? Why don't I talk about how gratitude helped heal my body and save my life? And that's why I created this channel. I wanted to be able to share these stories with you all. I haven't talked about the reason why, the liver issue. I just talked about the near medical emergency because it's hard for me to admit how depressed I was and that I was an alcoholic. I know in AA and other places they'd say, it's a disease and, you're always an alcoholic. And if that's, and that's why it's hard for me. I don't know those answers. I go to therapy all the time. And I'm not debating whatever anyone thinks. Question of, was I an alcoholic or am I an alcoholic? I don't know. I do know that I can never drink again. I know that. I know if I ever take a drink again, I'll be dead very, very quickly. I did learn in all those years in Al-Anon, when I'd go to the open AA speaker meetings, they would talk about how it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I believe that 100%. And that's why I know sometimes people go like, well, Brian, can't you have a drink now that your liver's better? Oh, by the way, I didn't even talk, so my liver's better. I missed all of that. I don't have a transplant. I didn't need a transplant. They aren't. I mean, they're not going. The doctors aren't going to say, "Oh, you're healed." But all my liver tests are normal. They've taken ultrasounds of my liver. It's a normal size. For all intents and purposes, it looks like they will never say I'm healed, and that's probably okay. I mean, that's the whole thing. If I were to drink, my body, I think my liver would react differently, and I would be dead pretty quickly. So, and if it's am I an alcoholic or was I an alcoholic? I do know, like I was saying, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I know I can't have one drink. When people say, Ryan, can you have a drink now that your liver's better? I know that I can't, because I know if I have one, it will lead to two, and that will lead to three, and that'll lead to death. And I know if I had just one drink, I would die. So I'm not going to play that game anymore. So I know that's a long story. I'm glad to share it. I've felt a lot of shame about what has happened in my life. That's why I wanted to share that story with you. I wanted you all to understand now, like when you go back and look at my other videos that I've made, you'll understand there's a deeper meaning to them. You understand now why I'm so focused on gratitude. Why I'm so thankful to be alive, and how close I got to nearly dying, how depressed I was before, how I wanted to die. It wasn't like I wanted to die. I wasn't, I guess, actively suicidal. I don't know how you want to describe it. But it's been a year now, and when my phone, I have a little timer thing or whatever, a day counter on my phone, and it tells me when I saw, 365 days sober. I was like, wow, I never dreamed in a million years I would make it 365 days sober. So I hope somewhere in all of this story you all can find, or someone, at least one person can find a glimmer of hope. If you're struggling, that's why I made this channel. If you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, if you're struggling with, alcohol or any addiction, I totally understand that. And again, like this channel is devoted to gratitude. It's not like a recovery channel. But at least now I feel freer in the future when I talk about things. I can openly talk about, you know, my drinking, and that's the thing. It's been a year, and it's been hard for me to. It's therapeutic for me to be able to have this conversation and come to terms with it, because sometimes I still haven't totally come to terms with it, and that's the thing. That's that shame and that's that guilt. So I hope I've never given the impression that I have my stuff together, because that's why I created this channel, for us to share these stories together so that we can grow together. I hope that's helpful. I will definitely put in the description links and information for the suicide hotline and recovery assistance hotlines that you can call if you struggle with those issues. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I hope that you all stay grateful. I hope that you stay kind. And as always, I'm grateful for each and every one of you. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.